So I think there's a tendency in these circles to only focus on one side of the immigration issue. That is to only see it from a purely Western perspective. And to look at all the kind of negative things it's brought to us, cultural, multiculturalism, hate speech laws, kind of the destruction of the native populations of various countries, social isolation, in many cases economic problems, rising crime rates, etc., etc. And we tend to focus on those, and we should probably focus on those because those are the ones that immediately affect us. But I think there's a case that can be made, and John Paul II made this, and Antonio Sochi also did an article about this, and the church's classical teaching on immigration, that the mass immigration probably affects the third world more than it affects the first world. For the simple reason that it causes a brain drain. In most cases, the immigrants, and I'll show you Canada's point system in a moment to kind of make this point, but the people we ideally want to come to our country are wealthy, young, skilled, more intelligent people. So we're basically taking the cream, skimming the cream off the top of these countries. And these are countries where people are much poorer, where the government has much less ability to pay for things like education, infrastructure, the kind of things that's needed to produce these kind of higher class people, and they don't have the resources to produce many of them. And so what kind of happens when they come to the first world is, especially if they're young, the government loses that investment. So let's do a couple thought experiments. Let's say we're in Nigeria, and okay, so we have a guy who goes through public school. I'm not sure what the education system is like in Nigeria, but let's just say it's government funded through oil revenue. The guy goes through grade school and secondary school, paid for by the government. Then he goes to school to be, a car mechanic. He goes to a trade school and becomes a car mechanic. And then he applies to immigrate to Canada. And he immigrates to Canada, at the age of 21, etc. That's cost the Nigerian government probably thousands of dollars because they paid for his schooling. They paid for probably subsidized his university. While he was there, he used state resources, presumably healthcare, infrastructure, roads, buses, all kinds of stuff that the government subsidizes. And in part why governments subsidize these things is it's an investment in the future. Our children are our future, where the government goes, okay, if we pay for literacy, mathematics, social, civic education, basic science, if we pay for education for all these things, we'll make our money back and then some, because the more educated your workforce is, the more efficient they are. So they do that with the expectation that they're going to be running a loss for probably 20, in some cases 25 years, but the sheer boost in productivity that comes with even modest investments in education is worth it, because over the lifetime of that person, they will pay back everything that cost them and then some. Even in very poor countries like in Nicaragua, when the Sandinistas came to power, they had a mass literacy campaign where they basically, I think it went from like 50% to like 80%. I forget the exact numbers. But they had a massive literacy campaign. And from my understanding, it was pretty successful because farmers were able to go from being illiterate to being able to read fertilizer instruction, to being able to read the seed packages, to be able to read stuff on more efficient ways to farm. Even like basic literacy and basic numeracy skills massively improve the effectiveness of your population. And in poorer countries, you're just a lot less able to pay for that. Let's not even talk about post-secondary education. In most Western countries, virtually everybody goes to primary school and secondary school. You're pretty much legally required to finish grade school and to finish high school. And in a lot of third world countries, people can't even do that. They have to go work. The government can't fund it. Their family can't afford it. In a lot of cases, the government offloads some of the costs, like uniforms or textbooks or something. And people in third world countries can't can't really afford these things. So even basic education is widely available in the first world. And depending on the country you're in, society can afford to either massively subsidize or provide your education entirely at public cost. And while a lot of third world countries do that, the facilities are much better in first world countries. It's much less of a burden on the economy. In part because wealth has diminishing returns. If you're taxed 50% of your tax rate when you're making $1 million and you get to keep 500,000 of it, then that's much less of a drop in your standard of living than if, let's say, you make $10,000 and you charge 50% and you're left with $5,000. Or probably a more realistic example, let's just take, I don't know, say that the average income in a developed country is 60,000. If you pay, I don't know, a third of your money, your income and taxes, you're at 40,000, which is a substantial decrease, but you can still live off of it. Probably a decent, like, working class or lower middle class life, depending on whether it's just you or not. But in the third world, let's just say the average income is, I don't know, $3,000. Going from 3,000 to 2,000 can be the difference between barely subsistence and starvation. So my point is, first world countries, because they're much wealthier on average, can afford to provide the same service as poor countries for much less percent of their GDP per capita. Now, the GDP per capita spent on education is probably higher in first world countries, but there's a ton of other services provided. In a lot of schools now, they buy iPads for every student. Every student has like 5 textbooks or more. There's all kinds of other stuff. But I'm just saying, like, even really basic literacy education is much more within the ability of first world countries to provide. Same thing with regards to medicine. Basic generic drugs are very cheap. Like to get my lamotrigine is only like $15 a month. And that's virtually nothing for me. But in the third world, where people are living off of $1 a day, they can't afford that kind of thing. They can't even afford antibiotics that might cost a couple cents. So to provide like flu shots or basic vaccines in the first world it's a very small amount of money. But in the third world, it's a much larger portion of the government's budget. So what is the point I'm trying to make here? My point is, when we get these people in the prime of their lives, after they've gotten their vaccinations, they've gotten like 2 decades of medical care, maybe some welfare, subsidized transit, all this stuff, the government is much less able to make up the loss of having these people leave after they have all that investment in them. The other issue is a lot of these people are wealthier on average. They might not be wealthy. They would be very poor by Western standards. But if you're in a country where the GDP per capita is 600 and you have a wealth of $20,000, you're in the upper class. You're wealthier than the vast majority of people in your society. And when people leave that society with that amount of money, that's a lot of money that leaves the country. And not only does it leave the country, but you have to keep in mind that person might have been able to start a fairly substantial business. They might have invested it in the country's stock market, in government bonds, in something that would help that country's economy. So by taking the wealthiest, best educated people, you're bleeding dry one of the government's main sources of tax revenue, the main sources of investment, the people who are most capable of leading the country, the people who are going to be the future of that country. And I think that's an aspect of it that we have to acknowledge and that we have to talk about. That even if we ignore all the other reasons for opposing immigration on our end, you have to think altruistically and think, what is it doing to these third world countries? And you can't really blame the people for leaving. Let's say, I don't know, these are all made up numbers. Let's say in India you become a medical doctor and you make, I don't know, like 20 grand a year. If you move to America, you can make 200 grand a year and you can live a upper class lifestyle as opposed to living in basically squalor in India. You can go to a country with a functional electrical grid, a functional sewer system where there's not just rampant disease, corruption, etc. So what most people do is they're like, okay, I'm just going to go to one of these countries. I don't want to be here. And so the best and the brightest leave, the leadership caste leaves. And it's not just in terms of economics, it's also genetic material. The people with the higher IQs, the people with more agency, with better impulse control, who can save, who have, like, as I said, the agency to actually immigrate to another country, the best people in that country leave. And people say, well, what about the Christians? What about the people who have good family values? Well, don't you think countries with rampant corruption, witchcraft, cannibalism, genocide, all these kind of things, don't you think they need good moral people of their people, but like their cultural and ethnic group more than we do? I mean, we have our problems in the first world, but we don't really have anything to the same extent. I know a lot of us bemoan the state of our place, but in parts of Africa, they like eat albinos. If you've ever seen that video, there's the guys in the Congo who believe that if they take this magic potion and then rape, it makes them immune to bullets. You have stuff in like South Africa where there's a trigger warning, by the way, type of sex where you put crushed glass or sand in a woman's vagina so it gives you better texture. Which is obviously all extremely dangerous. You have countries with the highest murder rates, the highest rape rates on Earth. And if those aren't countries that need like good family values, law-abiding people to eventually take over and lead these countries, I don't know what is. So it's like what people sometimes say is, okay, would you rather have a shit tier white person who's like white trash, who doesn't work, who has like a low IQ, who's probably a petty criminal, or would you rather have like a high IQ, like Christian with a very nice family, etc.? Well, I guess what I want is the African to go and make Africa great, to go and become a leader in that country and have a whole bunch of kids and breed out the plebs, and to make that country better. And I think this is just another way to look at it, and I think this is a way that's a bit more persuasive maybe when you're arguing with mainstream conservatives or mainstream liberals, that this is a problem on their end as well. I remember in Canada when we were having when Hong Kong was going over back to China, we had a mass exodus of millionaires from Hong Kong. A lot of the people who came here were like post-secondary. They might have had masters or doctorates in business or finance. They had millions of dollars in money. They were extremely successful. And don't you think maybe a country like China, where there's rampant poverty, could use those kind of people more to lead it? I don't know. I think it's something you really have to keep in mind. And to reference what I have in front of me, this is a percent of a country's nationals with university education who have moved to another country. So if we look at this, it's pretty clear. I mean, we have some people in the EU, but I kind of discount the EU because people just move between countries really easily there. But if we look at it, most of the places we have is like extremely poor countries: Ethiopia, Tanzania, Angola, Malaysia, to a certain extent East Asia, the nicer parts of Latin America. And these people leave these countries behind and they come here. In a lot of cases, like with regards to the migrant crisis, I think you have to keep in mind, to be able to pay a people smuggler to take you to Europe is thousands and thousands of dollars. In a lot of these countries, it's many times the average income. It's enough to get a university education, start a business, do all kinds of things that would be better for that country. These people tend to be better educated. They're costing the government the money that it takes to raise them, and they're young males. They're people in the prime of their life who are going to be the future leaders, who are going to be the future workforce of your country. And these people are leaving and they're coming to Western countries, and that talent and that stuff is vanishing. So I'm going to show you just some of what we require in Canada for immigration, because we have a points-based immigration system where we don't really let the plebs in, theoretically, although if you've been to Toronto, I really doubt that. But theoretically, the people we let in are those who are most used to our society, but it drains the third world faster than, I guess, normal mass immigration does. So for some, there's different types of immigration in Canada, depending upon how skilled you are, whether you have a job offer or not. So if you're a skilled immigrant and you don't have a particular job offer, you're required to have a certain amount of liquid assets in order to immigrate and to get permanent residence. So if it's just you, it's $12,000. If it's you and your wife, it's $15,000. If you have a couple kids, like most people in the third world do, it's $30,000. Now that doesn't sound like a ton of money, but let's look at the GDP per capita of a lot of these countries. Central African Republic, GDP per capita, $600. So that's like 50 times, if you have a couple kids, the GDP per capita of your country. That's not the average person. That's like the wealthiest people in those countries. And even if we get into, I guess, kind of some middle income countries that aren't considered that poor, let me see here, China, that's still like twice the GDP per capita of China. That's still like, that's pretty wealthy. Keep in mind, GDP per capita doesn't mean average income. Average income is significantly lower normally than GDP per capita. But yeah, like even, let me see, what's kind of some countries that aren't that bad? Morocco's not that bad, still like 4 times the GDP per capita. Middle Eastern countries, it's still like 5 times the GDP per capita. Even like Eastern European countries, it's still twice the GDP per capita. If you want to move there, you have to not only be a professional, but you have to be fairly well off by the standards of that country. So let's look at some of the other things that contribute to the point system. So this is the point system in Canada. So this is how we determine who's able to immigrant. You have to get a certain number of points, and I think we take X number of immigrants the year, and we take whoever has the highest point values. So we have I think it's, what is this? How many points total is it? Don't worry, I'm a professional. 500 points is the total. And there's a combination of different stuff here. So let's look at it. Education. If you are an English language speaker and have a post-secondary degree, that's 50 points. If you have work experience in Canada and a post-secondary degree, that's 50 points. If you have a trade qualification, that's 50 points. Let's see here. If you have both a trade qualification and you're an English speaker, keep in mind it's expensive to train people to be language speakers. To be English speakers. And a lot of time they learn English in the third world country. And English would be useful in the third world country because it's the international language of business and media, and a lot of technical stuff is in English, and it's expensive to translate it. So you have people who not only have a secondary degree, but they also have education. So we have offer of employment is another 600 points. And then we have points for age. So the people with the highest points is people 20 to 29, people in the prime of their life, people who have just gotten through. So people who have the most work years remaining are highest. And then for people in their 30s who still have plenty of work years left, they're also quite high. And then if you're over 45, you have 0. So yeah, like I said, it scales. People who have the most economic potential are the ones we take first. Now let's look at education. Less than secondary school is 0. Secondary school is 28. 1 year post-secondary is 84. 2 year post-secondary is 91. And then we get up and up and up. So university degree at college level is 140. So you're infinitely more likely to be able to immigrate if you have a doctorate. I can only imagine the amount of money it takes for a third world country to provide education for someone to become a doctorate. So then we have fluency in the official languages, French and English. Then we have Canadian work experiences. We have the spouse, that's not important. We have people with transferable skills, people with work experience, offer of employment. So that's all kind of the stuff we have that they look at when you immigrate to Canada. So we have like, okay, that's inside Canada. How many full-time, 30-hour per week or equivalent time skilled work experience have you obtained outside of Canada within the last 10 years? So that increases your score on the list. So let's say you're 25, you have 5 years of experience as like an aircraft mechanic or some other useful skill. You're leaving kind of at your peak economic productivity. So, like I said, the whole system is draining the people that third world countries need the most, and it's keeping them poor to a certain extent. It's preventing, kind of in many cases, the people with more agency, the smarter people, from becoming leaders in the country, and it's preventing a middle class from forming. And I know there's a ton of other factors, but I think this is definitely contributing, especially if you look at the sheer numbers we get in a lot of these places, from a lot of these countries. So I think that's just something to think about. I think it's kind of an interesting alternative way to look at it. And yeah, so that's the video for today. I'll talk to you guys later.